There is a sound in the hills of the Western Balkans that empties a village. Not a wolf. A village knows the wolf. This is higher, thinner. It starts like a child crying somewhere out past the last house, and then it climbs past anything a child could make until it's scraping the top of the sky. The old people have a rule for it. If you hear it, you don't go to the window. You don't open the door to see which of your neighbors is out there in the dark, hurt, calling, because no one is out there. And if the sound comes from up high, from the air, from the tree line, someone in the valley is going to die before morning. If it comes low, from the ground, along the river, it's only the animals this time, only the herd. They call it the Drekavac, the screamer, and for 400 years, everyone agreed on exactly one thing about it. You never, ever go looking for the crying child. So here's the problem with the Drekavac. Every monster has a shape. The Wendigo has antlers, the vampire has teeth. But if you go looking for what the Drekavac actually is, what it looks like, the stories fall apart. In one village it walks upright like a scalded dog. In the next, it's thin as a spindle with a head too big for its body. Somewhere else, it's a one-legged thing with eyes that catch the firelight. A bird, a foal, a creature with the front of a fox and the back legs of a kangaroo. And I promise, we'll get to that one. No two descriptions agree. And that should bother you, because when a monster can be anything, it usually means the monster was never the point. The Drekavac isn't a creature somebody saw. It's a sound somebody heard, and then spent 4 centuries trying to explain. The question is what they were really explaining. What was so unbearable that an entire corner of Europe agreed to call it a demon and lock the door, rather than say out loud what was actually happening to their children? Let's dig it up. Start with the name, because the name is the honest part. Drekavac. It comes from a Slavic word, drakadi, and it does not mean demon, or ghost, or beast. It means to screech, to shriek. The Drekavac is not named for what it is. It's named for the only thing anyone ever actually experienced, the noise. That matters. Hold on to it, because everything else, the body, the fur, the legs, the glowing eyes, all of that was added later by people trying to put a face on a sound they heard in the dark and couldn't place. And the Western Balkans are full of sounds like that. Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro. This is limestone country, caves, gorges, rivers that vanish underground and come up somewhere else. Sound does strange things here. A fox in breeding season screams like a woman being murdered. A bird you've never heard before drags a cry across the valley and it bends and echoes off the rock until you'd swear it was moving, circling, coming closer. Now, put yourself in the year 1700. No streetlights, no map of what lives in those hills. Your whole world is the firelight and the faces around it, and past the last house, nothing you can name. You hear it, a child, crying, out there in the dark, and every instinct you have says, go help, somebody's baby is out in the cold. The Drekavac is the story that grew up around one terrible piece of advice. Don't. So where did they say it came from? This thing that cried like a child? Here is where the story stops being folklore and starts being something colder. They said it was a child. Not a metaphor, not like a child. The Drekavac, in the oldest version of the belief, is the soul of a baby that died before it could be baptized. And to understand why that's the most frightening sentence in this entire story, you have to stop thinking like someone in the present and start thinking like a mother in a mountain village 300 years ago. In that world, baptism wasn't a ceremony. It was a border. A baptized soul went somewhere, up, on, through, to rest. An unbaptized soul went nowhere. It was locked out. Not sent to hell, exactly, That would be almost mercy, because at least hell is a place. This was worse. This was a soul with a door shut in front of it and no ground willing to hold it. And babies died before baptism, constantly. This is the part the monster is built to cover. Infant mortality in these villages was not a tragedy that struck once in a generation. It was the weather. It was a season that came every year and took some of the children with it. So picture what actually happened. A baby dies in the night, too soon, before the priest, and the church cannot bury it in the consecrated ground, not there, with the named and the saved. So the child goes into the earth somewhere else, the edge of the field, beyond the wall, unmarked. And the mother is told, gently or not, that her child is not at rest, that it's out there wandering, cold, locked out. Now, years later, that same mother is at the fire and out past the last house, in the dark. Something starts to cry like a child. You see it now. You see why you don't go to the window. The old tales say the Drekavac rises from its grave at night, and it comes to the edges of the village. And it begs. It calls out to anyone passing to baptize it, to finish what was never finished, to let it finally rest. This isn't a monster story. This is grief wearing a monster's face because grief was the one thing you were not allowed to say out loud. But a village just can't live inside that. It's too heavy. So the belief did what beliefs do. It grew rules, machinery, a way to make the unbearable at least predictable. First, the Omen. The Drekavac's scream wasn't just terror. It was information. If the cry came from up high, from the air, over the rooftops, it was a death, a person. Someone under one of those roofs will be dead soon, and the scream was the announcement. If the cry came from low, along the ground, down by the water, it was the livestock, disease coming for the herd, the cattle, the sheep. Think about how useful that is. You've heard a sound you cannot explain, in a world where you cannot afford to explain nothing. So the sound becomes a messenger, terrible, but readable. At least now you know which prayer to say. Then, the shape. And this is where all those contradictions I mentioned come from. Because once you've decided a thing is real, someone is eventually going to claim they saw it. In eastern Serbia, they described it standing upright, like a dog that had learnt to walk. Long-necked and long-legged, with the head of a cat. In one district, a single leg, and the eyes that threw the light back at you. Elsewhere, a body dappled and thin as a spindle, the head swollen too large. An ape thing, white-haired, with claws like a bear, a dappled foal, a bird. Every valley built its own Drekavac, because they weren't describing an animal. They were each drawing the face that best fit the fear in their particular patch of dark. And then, the defenses, because if you believe in a thing, you need to believe you can survive it. The Drekavac, they said, is helpless in the daylight. It fears the sun. It fears bright light, and it fears dogs. The ordinary dog at your ankle was protection against the thing that screamed like your dead child. And it had a season. It was strongest in the 12 days after Christmas, the days the old calendar called the Unbaptized days, when the world was thought to be thin, and the unbaptized dead came closest. Of course it was the strongest then. Of course the season for the screaming, unbaptized child was the darkest, coldest stretch of the year, the exact weeks a real baby was most likely to die. The monster kept perfect time with the graveyard. Now, here's the part that should be impossible. This isn't a medieval belief that died with the people who held it. The Drekavac kept getting reported, not in 1700, in our lifetime. 1992, a river near the town of Kruševac in Serbia. Villagers find the remains of an animal, and they can't place it. The wrong head, strange legs. Word goes out, they found a Drekavac, a body at last, proof. The remains get examined, and the answer comes back almost disappointing in how ordinary it is. It's a rotted fox. Decomposition had pulled it into something monstrous. 2003, the village of Tomatino, Polji, at the foot of a mountain, something is killing sheep, not a few. Over 2 years, a couple hundred head, torn up in the pastures. And the old word comes back into people's mouths, Drekavac. Though even the believers hesitated on this one, because the killing happened in daylight, and everyone knows the Drekavac doesn't hunt in the sun. 8. Near Sremska Mitrovica, more than 60 sheep and goats, dead. Near Vranje in the south, an unknown animal, seen and shot. And up on the mountain of Zlatibor, ask around and people will still tell you, quietly, and only if they trust you, that they have heard it. Out past the tree line, the crying that climbs. None of these are a monster, a rotted fox, a wolf pack working a flock, a stray dog gone feral. Every single case had an ordinary answer, and in every single case people reached instantly without thinking for a 400-year-old word. Ask yourself why. What does a farmer in the year 2008, standing over his dead sheep with a mobile phone in his pocket, reach for the Drekavac instead of wolves? Because the Drekavac was never really about the sheep. Here's what 400 years of villagers were actually doing. The scream was real. That part was never a lie. Foxes, birds, the wind through the limestone gorges, the western Balkans genuinely make sounds in the dark that will freeze the blood of anyone who hears them. But a sound is just a sound. It needs a story, or it stays unbearable. And the story these communities reached for, out of everything they could have invented, was a dead child, unbaptized, locked out, wandering the edges of the village, crying, begging to be let in. That was not a random choice. That was the truth they could not say, coming out sideways. They were burying their infants beyond the churchyard wall. They were being told those souls had nowhere to go. And they had no language and no permission to grieve a child the church would not bless. So the grief found its own language. It walked out past the last house. It climbed into the dark, and it screamed with the voice of every baby they'd put in the ground too soon. And they called it a demon, and they locked the door, because the only thing more frightening than a monster in the dark is the truth that there was no monster, just their own children, and no way to bring them home. That's the Drekavac, not a beast that was ever caught, a wound an entire culture agreed to call a monster so that it would be allowed to scream. We do this. All of us. When something is too big and too dark to look at straight, a plague, a war, the children we couldn't keep, we build a monster to carry it. Because a monster you can lock out. A monster has rules and weaknesses and a season. Grief doesn't. Grief just has a door you keep closed. The Drekavac let them survive the unsurvivable. It gave the worst thing in the world a shape, so they could point at the dark and say that instead of the truth. And the screaming never really stopped. It just changed its name. A dead fox in a river. A field of dead sheep. Every time someone reaches back for the old word. Because some part of us still needs the sound in the dark to mean something. And the Balkans aren't the only place that learned this. Far to the west, out past Ireland, over the last cliffs before the open Atlantic, they feared the dark for the same reason. But they didn't fear one lost soul crying at the edge of the village. They feared a whole sky of them. The unforgiving dead. The ones who never made it to rest. Gathering into a black host on the wind, and coming in through the west-facing window to take you before your time. That's where we're going next. Some doors you keep shut for a reason. If you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe, because we're working our way through every monster the human race built to survive its own grief. And the next one flies. Some things don't stay buried.